Hello, all, and welcome back to a new episode of Movies and Us, a weekly gathering place filled with conversations about movies, stories, and connection. My name is Jennifer Hahn.
And I'm Sarah Callan.
And today we're going to be reviewing the newest release, Gladiator II. All right, Sarah, kick us off with an IMDb summary for Gladiator II.
After his home is conquered by the tyrannical emperors who now lead Rome, Lucius is forced to enter the Colosseum and must look to his past to find strength to return the glory of Rome to its people.
All right. I feel like we're always trying to return the glory of Rome to the people perpetually.
Apparently so. And nobody seems to be very good at it, is the problem.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Couple years go by and we need to do the whole thing again because movies need to be made. Okay, well, let's start off with our one-sentence summaries for Gladiator II. Sarah, what is yours?
Ruling the Roman Empire is so easy, a monkey can do it.
Oh, I love it. What was that thing? What was the monkey's name? I don't remember. Dart or something?
Dundas.
Dundas. Oh, it was great. That was a great moment. My one-sentence summary is, eat food, not war.
Yes. It's great. Yep, that's a good way to go.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's dive in and share our high-level thoughts about Gladiator II, and we won't spoil this movie in this first section here. So, Sarah, I'm really curious to hear your thoughts about Gladiator II. I was thinking a lot about you while watching this movie, and I was really empathizing with the experience that you were enduring.
Yeah, Jen, it's not surprising how I feel about this movie. It's fine. The more, though, that I've thought about this movie, the more that I've disliked it. Mm-hmm. So that's interesting. I'm going to have to lower my rating on Letterboxd because I think I was too generous just out of the theater. This is, if you've seen Gladiator, you've seen Gladiator II, except Gladiator II has the benefit of having the Denzel Washington in it.
Yeah.
So that is the highlight for me. He is phenomenal. He's so good in this. He is bringing his theater experience to the big screen and just killing it. But yeah, I was just so frustrated by this film because it's so similar to the first one. I mean, it's essentially the same story done over again with new characters. And it just felt like a cash grab. And the studio's just trying to play on people's nostalgia to make money. And studios always do this. It's fine. It's whatever. But the more that I've thought about this film, the more disappointed I've become in it because I think there was such an opportunity here to say something. And this film doesn't. And I don't know. I wanted some meat in this. I also wanted, I don't know, some character choices that were grounded in the characters themselves and not just what we did the last time. I think that there was a way that you could do Gladiator 2 and have it be more meaty and meaningful. And instead we got the, I guess, fun, sensational 2024 version of the 2000 movie. So I don't know. I didn't love the first one, so I didn't expect to love the second one. And I was right. But Denzel is great. And so that was my highlight of this film.
We thought that he would be the highlight. And man, he is the part of this movie that makes it even somewhat watchable and entertaining. I loved the first one. Go listen to our episode where I just gushed about it for about 30 minutes of my half of the episode. And so I was really excited to see Gladiator 2. I had such high hopes for it. I was getting to see and experience a Gladiator movie in the theaters is going to be incredible. And so I'm settled into my seat, the big loud sounds and speakers and drums are going. And I'm oh, I'm ready. Like, this is going to be really good. And man, this movie is such a disappointment. I think that nearly every choice this movie makes, I think doesn't work for me, except for casting Denzel. That whole plotline is fascinating. I just feel like this movie is incredibly lifeless, and every emotion that I think I was supposed to be feeling, I was not feeling. I was kind of rooting for the wrong character in this movie. I was like, Macronus needs to topple over the umpire. Yes, I am down for that cause. So, man, I think there was such potential here. And from the storyline perspective, it's not great. I think it's really unfocused. There's not enough character development, and they lean on these like kind of cheap nostalgia trips, which I think just is pretty weak. And then the fight sequences. That's the thing that really carried the first movie and was such a spectacle and so thrilling when I watched the first movie, even on my small screens here at home. And in a theater, Gladiator, the original Gladiator from 2000 on a small screen at home is a far more thrilling experience than the fight sequences of Gladiator II. And that should say a lot. So I think the pacing of the fight sequences doesn't work. The just mass amount of like CGI and creatures that are used, I don't think work. I actually think they take away from the thrill and the excitement of those fight sequences. So it was really after the first battle sequence, the kind of opening battle sequence that, as you mentioned, that perfectly parallels the first movie, where I started to have a sinking feeling in my stomach. So I was like, oh man, that was not a good sequence on any front. We didn't learn anything about the characters. It's just overstimulation at one tone for about 10 minutes straight. And there wasn't a buildup. There wasn't excitement there. So I was like, this is not boding well for my hopes for this movie. So yeah, on the whole, I feel strongly that this movie did not need to be made.
Oh, yes. Absolutely agree. And like, I get it. Studios are just trying to make money, and that's what they're there for. I understand that. Movies don't always need to have like this giant message in it. They just are there to entertain, and I understand that. But this movie, I don't know, for me, it was such a slog to get through at times, except for when Denzel was on screen, because he is perfect. But there's so much of this that I was just like, why are we doing this again? And then you're going through all these motions with these characters. And especially with Paul Mescal's character, I was like, what are we doing here? Like, I don't understand.
Yeah.
We spend so much time with this character and we don't really get to know him, like, at all.
At all.
The most that we know about him is that Denzel over and over and over again says, there's this rage inside of you. And so that's kind of it, though. Like, we don't really get to, like, see that. And then, you know, he's doing the whole, like, leading the other gladiators in fight. But, like, we saw that in the first one because Russell Crowe's character had led an army. And so, like, he was, like, skilled in battle and, like, all of these things. And so, like, that was clearly set up here. And I guess we see Hanno, like, leading the army in that opening sequence. But I don't know, man. Like, there was just so much of this that I was like, what are we doing with this character? And then he makes choices. And I'm like, that's not at all set up. You just changed your mind and we don't know why. There's outwardly maybe some character growth, but we don't get to actually see the process of him growing. It's just like, oh, changed my mind. We're doing something else now. It's like, wait, what? What are we doing? There's just, from a story perspective, from a character perspective, I was just so frustrated.
Let's give a spoiler alert so we can really go in on this. So if you haven't seen Gladiator 2, it's available out in theaters. We are about to spoil this movie. So, man, there's so much to discuss about Lucius as a character, or Hanno. I was so annoyed with him for a lot of the movie. And I really was doing some self-reflection as this movie's unfolding on screen in front of me and people are fighting each other. I'm like, why am I so frustrated with this character? And I think it's because he seems to have this like outward display of emotion, of rage or whatever it is. But then he so quickly becomes this like leader of of the resistance and wanting essentially to fight for Rome. And I'm like, you did not care about Rome this whole time. You don't get to care about Rome now just because you are the prince of Rome now and the people somehow need a leader and you are their chosen person. And he's so different from Maximus, which I think would have been really fun for the movie to explore, in that he doesn't have the same sense of values and principles that Maximus had. So we got to see that even when Maximus is pressed, he's going to choose to make the right choice that is merciful, that is about honor for him. And Lucius doesn't do that. He takes people out, he beheads people, he acts on his impulses. And so I'm like, you don't get to be the leader of the resistance and take this like kind of line of succession of Maximus's honor, because I feel like he has not displayed that for much of the movie. Now, a version of the story where we get to see Lucius in this gladiator context really getting like intoxicated by that rage. Now that's a movie that I think would have been really fascinating, a great contrast to the first movie, and it fits well with all of the plot line that we get to see of Macrinus, who is like feeding and egging him on in that rage. I think that would have been really fascinating to see. It's like this character who has been through so much, but is like full force letting himself experience all of those emotions of rage and impulse. And it's great because it's different from Maximus. Maximus had all of that rage, and yet he was self-restrained in holding that back out of a desire to hold on to his honor. And I think that would have been some really great commentary on like the intoxication of bitterness and rage and what that does to the human spirit and all this kind of stuff. And then him having to break down and reconcile with that, maybe when he meets his mother or he has conversation with his mother, that would have worked better for the growth of that character. But we just don't get to see any of that. And so he feels like a character that kind of wants to have its cake and eat it too. And I was frustrated by that.
Yeah, that version of the character is much more interesting than what we got. Because I don't know, I think for the most part, all of these characters are kind of bland. Like, with the exception of Denzel, he is great, but everybody else is just, I think like bland is the best way that I can describe it. There's a little something there, but it doesn't feel like there's any depth to any of these characters. And so obviously you're invested in Hanno Lucius, whatever his name is, because he is the protagonist. And you know, intellectually, he is the person that we are following. He is the one that we're supposed to root for. But I don't feel like the movie does anything to get us to actually root for him. Like, his wife dies in the beginning and he's captured. So, like, that's wrong. But, like, that's the only kind of endearing thing that happens. And I don't know. So then we just see him fighting a bunch of dudes. And it's like, well, okay, I guess we'll do this. And then finally, he gets the moment that he's been waiting for. And he is fighting Pedro Pascal. And then he decides to let him go. But we haven't seen him like wrestling through all of these feelings. We haven't seen him doing that like hard work and thinking through what does mercy mean and what does forgiveness mean and what is my purpose in the world outside of the Colosseum. Like, we don't see him processing through any of those things. And so then after that moment, then he has the conversation of like, oh, well, this was my thought process. And this is, you know, I get to do what I want kind of thing that he has with Denzel. And it just felt like such sloppy writing to me, because there's a way to set that moment up that feels organic. And it's like, wow, this character who has been through so much, he was able to extend mercy and forgiveness, something that he did not want to extend in the beginning. Like, that is a huge character growth moment, but it feels like out of left field completely because we haven't spent enough time with the character to really see that emotional work being done.
Yeah, there's no build up for that. And honestly, even within the scene, even if there's no emotional build up, at least let's linger on that like sword perched above his head for a long moment and he's pondering this. He looks up at Macronus and then he chooses to drop his sword. Like build up that moment even if there's not emotional investment, at least for the moment. I feel some sort of tension. And he drops his sword so fast that I was like, "Oh, okay, well, that was nice. I guess he spared his life." I was thinking after the movie that I think this movie tries to accomplish a little bit too much, as is the case with a lot of movies that maybe are a little bit unfocused and get maybe a little bit ambitious. My proposal is we cut the entire Acacius storyline. I think it would have been really great to see Pedro Pascal in this Roman context, but cut him, and then the whole
agreed.
narrative tension and emotional tension is this relationship between Lucius and Macrinus, and kind of Macrinus feeding into this like really toxic, unhealthy, bitter place within Lucius. You know, your mother left you, blah, 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 like feed that whole narrative. And then we get that final sequence of them fighting each other, make that a big set piece, a big fight sequence. And then there's emotional stakes for that relationship. So at first, maybe there's a feeling of connection. They've both experienced much. They've both had a lot taken from them. And so Denzel's teaching him to fuel and feed that rage and then slowly complicate that relationship. So Denzel's being a little shady, and maybe Lucius is having second doubts about this kind of path that he's on after he meets his mother and is becoming aware of a larger purpose, greater than himself, greater than his revenge. And then there could be this really emotionally charged fight sequence between the two of them by the river at the gates. And like, I think that scene at the end there is also a little bit too short. So maybe they needed to build up that big fight sequence and then have that play out for a longer period of time. Cut the dang naval sequence in the Gladiator ring. Like, what was that with the shark and everything? Cut that.
Yeah.
Let's use all of our time and training and energy to film a really epic Denzel v. Paul Mescal fight sequence and this kind of complicated relationship of like teacher, student, mentor, mentee, but then kind of the mentee realizes like, no, like I've been led astray. And I think that would have been really exciting because we spend so much time building up this kind of this rivalry between Hano and Acacius, and that only takes us to like the halfway point of the movie. And then Acacius is gone and he dies. And so all of a sudden, again, we have to figure out what is Lucius's main goal again? Because he spared the life of this guy and then that guy died. So we need a new goal now. And there also just wasn't enough time for that to feel really big and weighty for his big vengeance plot. So, and the other thing with Lucius's character is that we didn't need his wife dying to give him emotional spark and direction. Him feeling abandoned by his mother who never came back for him and all this stuff, that's more than enough to work with. You know, we didn't need to throw the wife in there. And the movie kind of realizes that too, because it doesn't really revisit anything related to the wife at all after Acacius' death. So there's almost like so many character motivations and plot lines, and I think if we cut down like half of them, we could really make for some juicy Denzel and Paul Mescal moments. And just having them talk to each other and share these like ideologies. They're both such great like nuanced actors in expressing those small subtle emotions in the way that they speak to each other. So let's have more of them just like discoursing together in like the back rooms of the empire. That would have been really great too.
I love that idea. Yes. Because while Pedro Pascal is great, his character is not needed in this film at all. And those moments when Denzel and Paul Mescal, they're talking, those are so interesting. And seeing the way, especially, gosh, Denzel is so good. He's so good in this. And you can see that his brain is always the gears in his brain are always going.
Yeah.
He's always paying attention. He's always taking in information. And that makes him so fun to watch in this movie. And so those conversations that they're having, they can talk about these like high, lofty things. Both of these actors have that like theatrical gravitas that you want in roles like these. Like that could have been so much fun and so thrilling. My other desire for this film, whilst we are rewriting this whole thing, is I wish that this film had something to say, but that it was willing to lean into the kind of the futility of it all. You know, the first movie, Maximus is fighting for these lofty ideals, and he's fighting for freedom for Rome, and he's following the footsteps of Marcus Aurelius and all of this, and he gave his life for Rome to be free, and it didn't work. And here we are years later, and things have gotten worse. And so I think that there's something here that the film could have something to say about what do you do when it looks like evil has won? And how do you carry on when it looks like evil is inevitable, that evil will always win? How do you continue on in that? How do you fight for freedom in tyranny, even when past attempts have failed? Like, I don't know, I think there's something really interesting about the fact that people had been trying to fight for freedom and kept failing. There's something there that is interesting to me, and the film has no desire to touch it. It's just like, boop, it's been a bunch of years. Okay, let's throw people back into the Colosseum. And I'm like, wait, there's something really fascinating here that the film is just like, nope, we just want more fights. So I don't know exactly what that would look like, but I feel like acknowledging that and the heartbreak, the futility, the desperation of the people who had been suffering under the Roman Empire could have been a really interesting addition to this, rather than it just being about these dudes fighting.
And the first movie has a lot to say. You know, I mean, it is a big spectacle, but there were all these themes woven in there to meditate on if you wanted to. If you didn't want to, that's fine too. You'll be wildly entertained. But there's all this subtext and context around narrative, the power of shaping like your public image, and the way that that's used to maintain power, the fickleness of the crowds. Like all of that was so deeply ingrained into every fight that happens in the ring, and all of the motivations of Commodus to sway public opinion, and how much the people make Rome. So what the people want is what Rome is. And so ensuring the people on your side. There's so many themes that were introduced in the first movie. And you're right. There's such a fascinating opportunity to explore, especially Macrinus's worldview and perspective around like desiring the fall of the Roman Empire, and kind of the cynicism around this ideal that has been elusive for decades and decades. And he's kind of like, let's tear it all down, burn it to the ground, and let's rebuild something different because the people are weary. And while that his methods and whatnot are misguided, there potentially is this really interesting conversation to be had that this movie can introduce around like what happens when cynicism creeps in, and when it fuels these types of ideas about what should be done. How do you reconcile those things? And what motivates Macrinus to have reached that point where he's like, I'm done trying to fight for this thing, you know? What his expediency and lack of desire to fight for something bigger is fascinating. And I think we got to see that in the trainer of the gladiators in the first movie. So Macrinus feels kind of like a continuation and a culmination of a lot of that. But him paired against someone like Lucilla, who is so deeply invested in the ideals, would have been really interesting. And then Lucius is then presented with this choice. He can feed that cynical, bitter rage in him, or how will he choose to fight for something bigger than himself, and what will be the catalyst for that? Now that's really fun. And I feel like all of those pieces on the board are there. We've got Macronus, who's represented that. We have Lucilla, who's represented that. We have Lucius, who's kind of like stuck in the middle and hasn't been raised here for a while and is back and got some feelings. And he has a choice now between these two sides of the spectrum. And exploring those ideas of cynicism and idealism would have been really fun to do through these three characters who are positioned here.
Such a better movie.
Yeah.
We have in 25-ish minutes laid out so many other versions of this that would be so much more entertaining and actually have something to say.
Yes, exactly. And the other thing is that these two twin emperors like really didn't work for me. I mean, they're played clearly to be kind of these like fools and puppets on the throne, and the pomp and circumstance being absolutely ridiculous and all that kind of stuff. But I think they're maybe like alive for too long. Like I would love to have seen maybe Denzel take them out a little bit earlier, and then he is now in power, and maybe his plans was originally to topple the whole thing down and deconstruct it all, but perhaps he becomes intoxicated by being on the throne as well, or something there. But I just, they didn't work for me. I was like, okay, I get the point of them quickly enough, and they just are annoying to me on screen. And I don't think they add a lot to this message or overall theming that the movie could have really explored. So I think if they had like been taken out by Denzel halfway through, then we have the whole second half to like really lean into Macronus as a character, his ideology, his choices, his decisions. I think that would have been really fun. And man, Denzel would have been incredible at it. So yeah, on the whole, I think I'm curious what your thoughts were about those two, but I was done with them about 20 minutes in.
Yeah, I think this film suffers, and we already kind of touched on it, from having just too many characters. And I bake them into that. You know, they're fun, completely incompetent, just over the top. So like that's exciting, but they don't add anything to the story. And like, yeah, they don't do anything other than host the games in the Colosseum. That's kind of it. Mm-hmm. And that's a big bummer. Like, they could have done something interesting in the film, but they didn't. So again, in the first film, Joaquin, whatever his character's name was.
Commodus. So good.
Commodus, terrible name. Great performance from Joaquin, though. Commodus is incompetent and evil, and he is directly involved in the plot. Yeah. And he is necessary in the plot. And he is the foil to Maximus. So he is absolutely essential. I think you could take the emperors out of Gladiator II and be kind of fine.
Yeah.
Like, you could essentially have the same movie without them. Like, so then that just adds more characters, more spectacle, more runtime. And I think, I don't know, for me, there was like parts of this where I was like, what are we doing? And I think trimming some of that down, like you said, like make Denzel's character, the emperor, so much more interesting, because then he is directly influencing the plot, and he's interacting with Hanno, Lucius, whoever, and actually accomplishing something, rather than these two emperors are just clowning and doing their thing and don't actually matter.
Yes. And what was great in the first movie is that Commodus is evil, and yet he is human. And so there's this really fun like tension as a viewer where you see that all he desires is to be loved and to be worthy. And that is such a human, deeply human desire that like is universal. And so it's manifesting in incredibly terrible ways, but like we oddly feel really connected to him. These two are just so ridiculous. But maybe if they were on screen for a little bit longer, I would have loved to see Denzel just manipulate the hell out of them. And we see a little bit of that, but it comes like far too late in the movie. And I think it would have been really fun to see Denzel just like playing the two of them like a literal fiddle and seeing his manipulation tactics at play and kind of this like force behind everything happening. We're reviewing Dune Prophecy over on our other podcast, TV and Us. Go check it out. But I would love to see Denzel being the Ben Gesserit and a truthsayer for about 45 minutes, and then take these two hoodlums out. That'd be great.
Oh my God. Yes.
Creeping in the shadows.
1,000,000,000,000%. Yes. Those parts when he ascends to power like that, and then because it's so good. That whole thing is set up because you've seen him the entire time sitting behind them, and he's just paying attention. He's watching everything that's happening. So he knows how to play these two because they're obvious and they're dumb, and he's not. And so that moment when he's finally in power and those two have a fight, and he knows if he separates those two brothers, he can manipulate them to do his will. Ugh, it's so good. It's absolutely delightful. And I agree. I would have wanted more of that. So we're going to remove Pedro Pascal. He's lovely. We want to see him in all the things, but we simply don't have room in this story for another character. Nope. So we must eliminate him and just focus on Denzel rising to power, which is his rightful place, is to rule over the land. I'd be down for that. I was kind of rooting for Denzel. I know that you're not supposed to, but by the end, I was like, he's number one, he's Denzel, so he's perfect. And number two, his character is interesting. So there's that. So it's just like I'm rooting for the wrong person, but go Denzel. So yeah, I needed to have a little like heart to heart to myself after, but more time of him just pulling the strings would have been an absolute delight in this. Oh, so good.
Yes. And it would have been so juicy and delicious to see him just slinking around in the shadows, playing on people's emotions, which is really what he does with all of them, with Lucius as well, and using that too as his advantage as he's calculating his every step would have been so great. I think the other thing that was like interesting to pair kind of Paul Mescal as Lucius in kind of the opposition to Denzel is that, Paul Mescal is an incredible actor. Like we've seen him in some amazing things, and he brings such emotional vulnerability and expressiveness to his roles. But the kind of ability for me to buy that he is now going to be like the leader of an empire is just he carries himself differently in this movie, and maybe he needed a little bit more of that like regal gusto and charisma that would compel the masses. I think Pedro Pascal as Acacius has that. I was like, low-key, I'm kind of imagining this movie with Pedro Pascal as a protagonist as Lucius, but that's a different movie. But when Denzel's on screen and he's speaking to people, the scene where he's speaking to the Senate is incredible. But he has this bravado and this flair and this confidence that I buy him as a leader of an empire, and I'm actually, if I'm a little Roman citizen in the corner somewhere, I want to follow that guy because he is able to captivate people. And so that like charisma and presence, I think, was lacking for what Paul Mescal brings to the table. Partially, it's the way the role is written as well. But it was really obvious to me when we see them two speaking to each other in that final showdown at the city gates. And after Denzel gets taken out and Paul Mescal speaking to like these mass amounts of like soldiers of the empire, I'm like, this is not working for me. I don't think I'm buying this. So I think that's an interesting aspect of them being kind of on two sides of the spectrum of kind of the yin and the yang of this movie is, Denzel is a force to be reckoned with. And I, as a viewer, am also kind of intoxicated by him and ready to follow him into battle.
1,000%. Yes. Denzel, where are we going? We will follow you. Sorry, Paul Mescal. You're great, but you are not Denzel. Yeah, that final ending showdown. Oh, it was so lame. Like,
Ugh.
it is supposed to be. It is supposed to be the Maximus versus Commodus at the end of the first film.
Oh, yeah.
It's supposed to be that, you know? It's supposed to be the Avengers versus Thanos, you know? Like, it's supposed to be this big thing. It's the final boss for your hero to defeat. And it was so boring. And I was like, what are we doing? It was just, this whole movie is just so poorly paced, I think. I was so frustrated by the end. I was like, okay, this is a terrible fight. Can we just speed this up? Because I'm ready to leave this theater. Like,
And
I'm
you
done.
know what?
And
Your wish is
then-
granted because it's short as heck.
Yes. It is short as heck. And then, you know, he gives his whole speech to the army, and the army's like, cool, bro. Yeah, we'll follow you. YOLO. And then that's not the end of the movie.
Mhm.
The thing that really annoyed me is that we see Lucius back in the Colosseum, and then he touches the platform where his mother died and is like, mother. And then he's quiet for so long. And then he picks up the dirt. He says, speak to me, father. I'm like, really? That's how we're not ending the film on this like big, like all the army's going to follow him. So now he is the rightful heir of Rome, which I'm like, okay, yeah, sure. I don't know how Roman politics works. We don't end there. We end on this stupid moment that is maybe supposed to be emotional or maybe supposed to show some humility in him. But instead I was like, what? Why? Why are we doing this? Why couldn't you have just been happy with your army and go away so that I can leave the theater? Like, why are we doing this?
Yeah, he
It was
like his
so
hand
annoyed.
hovers over the like sand
Oh my God.
for like
For
5
so
whole
long.
minutes. It feels like a literal eternity.
Ugh.
And then he picks it up the way that Maximus did.
It's so stupid.
I think there's a version of this movie where that would have been really emotional. It's just not this movie. I was like, I think I'm supposed to be
Yeah.
feeling things right now, but I don't. Even when, then, I don't know if you felt more connected to her, but even when Lucilla is killed, I didn't feel as much that I think I was supposed to feel in that moment, because there's so many other things happening, and the literal like entire crowd of people, all of Rome is revolting, you know, and there's not just not time, and there's not time for our character to mourn that. There's not time for anybody, and it also just, I didn't understand what the stakes were. Okay, she dies, but we're trying to save all of Rome here, you know, and so I think that her death could have been used better for that other movie that we were writing together, where that's the thing that perhaps clicks for Lucius to believe in something bigger. Maybe the words that have been spoken to him around like what you do in this life echoes throughout eternity, and him seeing his mother die helps him finally realize like his time on earth is short. How will he choose to spend it? And that being kind of a wake-up call for him would have been really great, but they didn't even use her death in a way that could have been really valuable for this character.
Yeah, they did her dirty, and I'm upset about that, because she is such a cool character. In the first film, she was my favorite. I wanted so much more of her. And we see a little bit of her in this film, but like, she kind of sucks in this just a little bit. Like, Connie Nielsen is great. She's a fantastic actress. She looks gorgeous. She has not aged, which is wild to me. But
I don't get
as
it.
a character, as a character, that sharp political mind that she had in the first film is kind of gone in this one. Like, she knows enough to not like plot with the servants around, but that's kind of it. Like, she convenes her merry band of senators together to have a chat, but that's kind of it. And I wanted so much more for her. And then with her and Lucius, it all just happened so quickly. One day, he's upset with her, pushing her out, yelling at her to get out of his cell. And then the next day, he's like, yo, that's my mom. And I'm like, what are we doing? How did this happen? I don't understand what is going on here. Because we're just changing our mind at the drop of a hat. And I'm getting whiplash here.
Well, yeah, because he forgives her, embraces her, reconciles with her, and is now fighting for Rome, which he previously hated, all in like 24 hours. It's incredible.
It's quick. I mean, miracles do happen, apparently.
Yep. The only explanation, there must be some wizarding happening in the background.
Ooh. Is Ravi a wizard?
Oh, yo. That would be sick. What do they call it? Devil's breath or whatever? That ain't no opioid, okay. I'm telling you.
Yeah.
That's some mind-changing.
It's the drugs.
It's the drug. It's probably the same drugs that Joel took at the Last of Us season finale episode. You know, where it changes his entire personality. We're really coming full circle here, bringing the bridges between movies and us and TV and us.
Honestly, though, like, hey, let's just throw this in here. If you would like to hear us talk about Pedro Pascal in a very different role, head on over to TV and Us, where we just finished reviewing The Last of Us. And Pedro Pascal is so good in that show. So please go listen to that and then come back here and listen to us make fun of this movie.
So, speaking of manipulating and political maneuvering, when we were watching the first Gladiator, that was something that we were like, man, we want like House of Cards, Roman Empire style, you know, just some great betrayal, backstabbing, plotting. And we could have gotten that with Lucilla being written better, and especially the plotting between Macrinus and Lucilla would have been so fun to watch because they are both so sharp, both incredible actors that could have sold that so good. And it would have been really fun too to see Lucilla trying to plot to dethrone these two fools on the throne and not realizing who this kind of like phantom controller behind the scenes was until she finally realizes and then begins to plot even better, you know? And I think that could have been really fun to see. And like the first movie, the Gladiator fights are really just the, you know, byproduct of all of the plotting that's happening behind the scenes. And I think that movie, that first movie does a good job of being really clear-minded about that. And this movie needed to have that as well. Give us the plotting, give us the emotional character moments, and then so the fights are just a vehicle, a stage to play out some of that stuff and then to create some new bitterness that then they can go plot some more about based on some of the choices that are made in the ring. But the Gladiator fight is not the main purpose. Everything surrounding it is actually the main storyline. And I think that's also where this movie kind of misses the mark too. So I would love to have seen some political maneuvering between Macrinus and Lucilla.
Oh, that would have been so much fun. That would have been so great. And you could have even had some, like, at first they're on the same side and then she's stabbed in the back and he then ascends to the throne. Like, that could have been so much fun to watch too. There's so much you can do with those two characters. And then Lucius is kind of just stuck in the middle and is just kind of an instrument to be used by these two, you know, political animals. That would have been so fascinating to watch. And then even seeing, I don't know how, like, intensely political you want to make Lucilla, but you could make her not have, like, a maternal motherly instinct toward Lucius, too. You could even go that route of he is a means to an end so that she could have power. Like, you could go into that territory if you wanted to. Or you could go the other way that you had been talking about of, like, reconnecting with her is what unlocks his heart to then fight for Rome, yada yada, like the positive
Being
side.
loved,
But you
blah,
could
blah,
also go
blah.
the negative way, which would be interesting. So you just
Oh,
you
that would've
have
been
so
juicy.
many opportunities
Yeah.
with these characters.
Oh yeah, I love that alternate version. Yeah, or some middle ground of like she loves him deeply, but the agony of having to make a hard choice to maybe sacrifice him, whatever she needs to, because of her belief in the larger purpose, the for the masses, for society to be better, and her having to like make that agonizing choice could have been fascinating. It's giving the same energy as what was it? I think it was Han Solo. And there's some moments in Star Wars where we get to see some of that as well. You know, of like, I know that you're my son, but you're literally killing the galaxy. So I think that could have been interesting too. Maybe this tension there.
Again, we have so many options.
Ugh.
And they are all more interesting than what we got. And like it's like you said, it's the characters that are interesting, and it's what they are doing behind the scenes and their motivations and their goals, and it's how these things clash with one another. That's the interesting part that then bleeds into the Colosseum. And it feels like Gladiator II is almost working backwards and just going, okay, we want to have a Colosseum fight with baboons. We want to have a Colosseum fight with a rhino. We want to have a Colosseum fight with sharks. And then
I hated it.
they just made plot around that.
Yeah.
But that's not how that works. That's not interesting. We need to be interested and invested in these characters first, and then what they do in the Colosseum becomes interesting because there's tension and there's stakes and we're invested. But in this, I was just like, okay, when is Denzel coming back on screen?
Yes, I hated all of the fight sequences. And it's supposed to be the best part. That's what I'm supposed to be, just on the edge of my seat. And I'm like, I'm not trying to go to the zoo, people. Okay? What are these animals doing in here that like they just look really the baboons really did me, and I was like, these look terrible. They look so fake. That shark looks so
terrible.
Fake. So bad. Honestly, just give me two people fighting, and that's thrilling enough. We don't need feral baboons and a whole shark that looks like it's from Finding Nemo in this movie. Like it looks so visually jarring, and I think that is highly problematic. Immediately, I'm just kind of giggling in my seat instead of being terrified. And I think that's the difference in, the 2000 version and this one is I almost am like, man, it's better when we don't have technology because we can't do some of this ridiculousness.
Oh my gosh. Yes, I absolutely agree. I laughed so much during this film. It's not meant to be a comedy, but I laughed at everything because, man, portions of this just looked awful. It was terrible. And again,
So bad.
Those moments in the Colosseum that are so over the top, they don't mean anything. I maybe there's a little bit of a like income inequality thing that's touched on because you see a little bit of like the peasantry, but I think that there was such an opportunity here to contrast the opulence of the Colosseum and show just the depravity of constructing these games that are just so much bigger and there's so much more spectacle for the murdering of human beings.
Mm-hmm.
And this empire isn't even willing to care for its citizens. I feel like there's something that could have been written in there to make that contrast really stand out and show just how evil and unjust the Roman Empire was. But the film doesn't want to say anything. It's just there for these fights and to capitalize on people's nostalgia. And so even in those fights, I was like, it doesn't mean anything. It's not tying into some larger theme or idea of this film. It's just like, okay, cool, CGI baboons, let's go.
Ugh.
And they look awful.
They look terrible. And the thing is, too, the way that fight sequence is shot is there's so many shots that are still with the baboons like baring their fangs and like roaring, which I think takes away the power of how we use CGI. Like to see their figures like prancing around the Colosseum and fighting is one thing, but the minute you like kind of point the camera at it and it's really clear that they're so fake looking, I think it like also totally like shatters the feeling of tension immediately. And so okay, we need to use technology, that's fine, but I think we don't need to like point the camera at it and really like let our brains so clearly sit with the fact that these baboons are not actually there and then let our brains like wander down that direction, you know? So great, throw some CGI in there, some baboons, fine if you have to. But there's so many. I think there's like 4 or 5 shots straight of like close up on baboon, fake baboon face, where I was like, no, don't show us this. I don't want to actually know that they're fake. Let me at least have enough mystery that I can pretend that these are real. You know, I can no longer pretend when we're pointing the camera straight at them.
Yeah, it was rough. That's one of like the first fights too, is the baboons. I was just like, oh no, this does not bode well for us.
Oh, it's so silly. And that shark looks so fake too. The water just looked so fake. Oh man. Unnecessary too. You know, I think the first movie, I was thinking back, has also like a recreation of a war sequence, a historical war sequence. And I think they just use like moving set pieces or moving figures to pretend that they're on a ship or whatnot. So there's a way to do this that doesn't need to be let's CGI and put water in the entire Colosseum, which I'm like also I don't yeah, it's strange.
Yeah, the water one really took me out because then I was just trying to think in logistics and it didn't compute to me. Like how could you pump that much water in the Colosseum?
Yeah.
And how could you keep it sealed to retain that much water? And then how did you get the boats in the water? How did you get the sharks in the water? Like I had a lot of logistical questions about this shark business, and the film wasn't ever going to answer them. But during that sequence, all I was thinking about is the logistics of how to pull that off rather than actually watching whatever was happening on the screen.
Oh, I went down that same thought train too, especially because I think there's like a pan over shot of the kind of pipes pouring more water into the Colosseum too. You know, they're all like set of pipes all around that are continuously pouring water in. So I got distracted by that too. I went down a little thought train of how that was working.
And there were like little islands too.
Yeah.
And I was like, did somebody like it's somebody's job to build the islands in the middle of the water version of the Colosseum? Like, what does the events team for this look like? Because they need a raise. Whoever is manning this and pulling this nonsense off, they need a raise. Because, wow, that's a lot of work to do. To flip an event center like that, Jesus, that's too much. Too much.
Yeah. Okay, another last big thoughts before we wrap.
Okay, I have a couple of things. I would like to share one of my favorite lines and then one of the stupidest lines.
Yep.
And then we have to talk pinky rings.
Yep.
Because there's a lot of them.
Okay.
So one of my favorite lines in the entire film is said by Denzel Washington.
Oh my gosh, I hope it's the one I have jotted down too.
Ooh, okay. It's the moment he's talking with the guy that owes him all the money. And Denzel says, I own your house. I want your loyalty. And that pause before he says your house is just so delicious. It's a phenomenal line. And he delivers it with such perfect intensity. It's amazing.
I love that we're going to have a whole dedicated segment in this episode of just spitballing all of our favorite Denzel moments from this episode. I have a
There's
bunch.
so many good ones.
I have a bunch jotted down
Yes.
too. Yeah. It's not the one that mine is different. So the one that I have jotted down is when he says in the room with the Senate where he's doing his big bravado thing, he says, that is politic. And it's
so
great.
good.
Oh no, that moment actually might have been right before the Lucilla Coliseum fight. He says it to somebody though.
I don't remember, but that moment is just perfect.
You know which one I'm talking about. Okay, great.
Yes. Yeah. No, it's great. It's so good. I was so tickled by it.
Yeah, it was so good. Another one of my favorite Denzel things that he does with this role, which, I mean, the man's a genius, but it's when he's in Lucilla's quarters when she is already captive and she's now executed to die. And he's got some incredibly amazing, smug as hell grape eating right in her face. And just the detail, that kind of prop of using the grape and like him chewing like inches from her face, I thought was just genius. It's such a like subtle, like FU sign of disrespect for him to be eating as he's like spewing daggers at her. And he does it with such bravado, such swag. It's incredible. So the use of the grapes in that sequence is one of my favorite things that he does too.
And then on a similar vein, that moment when he meets Lucilla, I guess at her house, and she pours him a drink and he sniffs it and then he puts it on the table. And I loved that moment because he's like, okay, I'm going to take your thing, but I'm not actually going to indulge in that. It's like okay, thank you, but no. It was so good.
Oh, it's so great. It's so great. There's some other things. I don't remember when this happens, but there's a moment I noticed too where he adjusts his belt when he's having a conversation. It's this like big giant gold belt. Do you know what I'm talking about? I forget who he's talking to. It might have been one of the senators. I think
he's talking with Hanno.
Okay. Yeah. And he adjusts
I could be wrong,
his
though.
giant gold-plated belt. And almost it's a short pause that he takes right before he begins to speak. He adjusts his belt. And then he begins to wax poetic about how, you know, blah, 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 blah. But I thought that was such a fascinating way for him to like kind of show his power and his wealth and his influence with that gesture. And it's such a small, subtle thing. But the pause with that before he speaks is pretty incredible too.
I mean, can we just talk about how the man is using his wardrobe? Like, he is working the hell out of all of his costumes. And the way that he's constantly like moving things around, or he's like whooshing his cape behind him.
Cape.
Like, it's so epic. The way that he is using his wardrobe and just flaunting the opulence in our faces. And he just doesn't have a care in the world. He just got to make sure that he is looking good. And I loved everything that he was doing with the constant adjustments to whatever he was wearing. They're so good. All those little details are so much fun.
Oh, it's captivating to watch, honestly.
Yes.
I just love too when he has this big, cheesy, devilish grin on his face at all of the wrong moments. It's like wrong for the moment. It's like a very serious moment, or someone's about to die or whatever it is. And Homeboy's just cheesing in the corner with this devilish smile. And it's so juicy and satisfying to watch. But he sells it. I'm like, yeah, what do you need? Let me be your instrument, Denzel, please.
No, absolutely. Like, whatever you want, let's go. I'm all in.
Yeah. Yeah, not him saying you are my instrument to Lucius with such degradation. We're over here like, no, but please, we will gladly be part of your orchestra.
I'm fine. Yeah, I'm fine with that. Like, that's cool. So you're Denzel. Yes.
Yep. Okay. What was it? This very stupid line.
There's so many really stupid lines, but this one got me so good. I was laughing so hard. I don't think I was supposed to be. But it's when Hanno, Lucius, whatever. He has been given the wooden freedom sword, and he like stabs the dude with it, and he said, "Wood or steel, a point is still a point." And it's supposed to be this like dramatic moment. I'm just like, what? That's the best you could come up with? You just murdered a dude with basically a wood stick, and that's what you're saying? I was so annoyed.
Oh my gosh. So many of these characters have just the most ridiculous lines. I mean, in the first movie, honestly, I think for me, it's part of the charm. Like this is just so stripped down to just these like very basic concepts. But sometimes they're just a little silly. So like even in the opening credits, there's just a line that's like, corruption spreads. And I'm like, well, that's very clear. That's very good. There's no subtlety, no nuance, no complexity. Like it's very hitting you over the head with what it's trying to say. And I suppose if you're getting taken out by a wooden sword too, like, yeah, a point is a point.
Yeah, I get it. Sure.
Okay, pinky rings.
It's so silly. Basically, everybody has a pinky ring in this film.
Oh my goodness.
It got to a point where I just kind of stopped counting because it was too many. Like,
yeah,
everybody, pretty much, who has wealth is wearing one.
Wow.
Lucilla doesn't. But I think pretty much everybody else with money
that tracks
is wearing one.
Some great data points. Wow.
Yeah, it was excessive. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm having pinky ring overload right now. It felt like I was watching Casino, where I'm just like, oh my gosh, everybody in the background of the shot has a pinky ring.
Yeah. In the first, speaking of rings, in the first like 10 minutes of the movie, right before the battle sequence, I had a Sarah moment because Lucius and his wife are trading their rings, and he puts his ring on her. He puts her ring on his pinky finger, which makes sense.
Yes.
But then he puts his ring on her like ring finger, and I'm like, that's not gonna fit. That's gonna fall off.
Right?
So we need to put it on a necklace or something, because homegirl's about to go into battle, and she can't be having a ring dangling off her finger.
But here's the thing. Her whole purpose in this movie was to die. So it didn't matter what finger he put that ring on, because it was always going to end up in the ocean. So it didn't matter. But I had the exact same thought.
Really? Okay. I was like, I had the thought, and then right afterwards I zoomed out and I looked at the thought and I was like, that is such a Sarah thought. Wow. Amazing. I'm glad you were here in spirit.
I'm so sorry. I'm sorry.
Yeah, he was putting on her, and I was like,
in this way,
that's not gonna fit. That's too big. It's like this really emotional moment between them as they like are sharing their love before they both know they might die. And we're over here like, find another way to get that ring on her, dude. Like, how could show up with a chain, something, a string tied around her neck?
Yes,
but you're right.
It's gonna end up that simple. Have her.
It's going to end up in the bottom of the ocean for Ariel and the Little Mermaid to put into her little collection.
Ooh, okay. This is a crossover event, because that's one of the shiny things that she finds.
Yes.
That then makes her want to go to see where the people are.
And then she comes up and she realizes it's the Roman Empire, and she's like, actually, I think I'll just go back home now.
Deuces.
Yeah. Back to my father.
I'm going to go home for a while.
Yeah.
I don't want any part of this.
King Trident versus a Roman emperor, I think I might pick King Trident. At least he loves me with some sort of fatherly love, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, it's chill. You're hanging out with your ocean friends and not getting murdered by a fleet of Roman soldiers. Sounds like a good plan.
Great choice.
Like it.
Yeah. She's smart. She's a smart gal. Okay. Any other last big things? Yeah. This seems like a fitting ending to this very chaotic movie and a very silly episode. I love it.
Can I just bring it back to the very silly movie? And I'm going to end on a positive note.
Okay. Yes.
With this line said by Pedro Pascal, which I really loved this line. It was so good and so spicy. And he says, "Torture me if you want, but don't lecture me."
Yeah.
And I just loved that after he was captured and facing his death. He was like, "I don't want to hear you speak, you idiots. Let's move along." And I loved that. He is so annoyed at these idiots talking to him and lecturing him. And he's just like, "Shut up." I loved it.
Shut
It
up,
was
take
great.
me out.
Yeah.
With your very
Like,
pointy
let's
device.
move on.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh. Yeah, that's great. Man, he was so regal in this role. I really liked him. I think it's probably not his like best acting work, but I just had the sweet satisfaction of seeing him in the whole garb, the whole wardrobe, the whole getup, and he's just such a commanding presence on screen. So it was very exciting to see him in this role.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. If we can have a like Gladiator-esque movie with Pedro Pascal playing a character that's actually important to the movie.
Yes, please.
That would be great.
Yeah. And then obviously bring Denzel.
He's got it.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
that'd be lovely.
Wonderful. All right. Well, this was our review and discussion of Gladiator II. You can find it available out in theaters. Thank you for listening to today's episode of Movies and Us. Our name sums it up. We're all about movies and the powerful ways we can connect with each other and the world around us. This podcast is about all of us and our shared stories, so everyone is welcome here, and we're so glad you spent time with us today. You can subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you tune into your favorite shows. Drop us a rating and review, letting us know your thoughts about Gladiator II. And let us know what your favorite Denzel moment was in Gladiator II, because we want more opportunities to relish in all of the juicy bits. You can connect with us on Instagram, Threads, and TikTok at MoviesAndUsPod, or email us at moviesandUsPod@gmail.com. We will be back next week to share a very exciting new format type with Movies and Us here, and very fitting for the season and month that we will be in by then. So come back and check that out. We hope you have an amazing week, and we'll see y'all very soon.